The Senate will vote on the nomination of Michigan Supreme Court Justice Joan Larsen to serve on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Though she currently lives in Michigan, Justice Larsen was born in and hails from my state of Iowa. In fact, she and I share the same university, the University of Northern Iowa, for our bachelor's degrees. I've also learned since meeting Justice Larsen that her father was longtime CEO of Lutheran Services of Iowa, now retired, but during the time he was at CEO, he was the very same person I often met with for breakfast when he would come to Washington to tell us about the concerns of Lutheran Services of Iowa. At that time, I never knew that I might be speaking in favor of his daughter. Didn't even know of the daughter at that time. So I'm proud to see a fellow Iowan and such an eminently qualified nominee be nominated for the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. For those who may not be familiar with her career and accomplishments, a few minutes will give me an opportunity to share with you about those. I think you'll find, as I have, that Justice Larsen is particularly well suited to serve as a federal appellate judge. Justice Larsen has an outstanding academic record, having received numerous awards during her undergraduate and law school careers. Justice Larsen was a presidential scholar at the University of Northern Iowa and graduated with the highest honors. She graduated first in her class at Northwestern University Law School, where she won the John Paul Stevens Award for Academic Excellence and served as editor of the Northwestern Law Review. She began her legal career as a clerk for Judge Santel on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and then clerked for Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court. Following her clerkships, Justice Larsen joined the D.C. firm of Sidley Austin, one of the largest law firms in the United States. Justice Larsen spent 2 years as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel, where she provided legal advice to the President and executive agencies on difficult issues of constitutional and statutory interpretation. Justice Larsen has taught constitutional law and criminal law at the University of Michigan Law School since 1998, where she has earned the respect of faculty members and students alike. She won the L. Hart Wright Award for Excellence in Teaching early in her teaching career. In addition to these teaching responsibilities, Justice Larsen ran Michigan's clerkship program, helping hundreds of students and alumni pursue clerkships at the federal and state level. As an adjunct professor, she continues to run the law school's moot court program. Her colleagues at the University of Michigan praised Justice Larsen's writing, quote, "Even among the talented and ambitious lawyers at an elite law school, Joan stands out for her ability to make the penetrating insight that untangles some knotty problems of statutory interpretation or judicial doctrine. Especially distinctive, moreover, is the rigor and even-handedness she brings to her analysis," end of quote. I'll share one more example from that letter because I think it addresses some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that they may be concerned with her approach to the law. Her colleagues wrote this, quote, "For those of us who have found ourselves on the opposite side of a debate with Joan about a case, a statute, or some broader issue of constitutional history, she has demonstrated time and again that she is both a gracious and intellectually honest partner in the collaborative project of figuring things out. What matters for Joan is not winning, but working out the right answer. And then I bring emphasis to these last sentence. Even when you disagree with her, it is impossible not to respect her and to take pleasure in the process of refining the issues actually in dispute, end of quote. In other words, as I see it, Justice Larsen is and will be a jurist who seeks to find the right answer, never simply one that she prefers as a matter of policy. We can already see from her time on the Michigan Supreme Court that Justice Larsen is a principled jurist on that court since she was appointed in 2015. It happens that she was elected to the position in her own right in 2016, and by a resounding majority, winning every county in Michigan. Colleagues on the court have praised her sharp legal analysis, her clear and crisp writing, and most importantly, her work ethic. Outside of the courtroom, Justice Larsen is actively involved in volunteer efforts to serve disadvantaged children, and she works with Michigan's Veterans Drug Sobriety and Mental Health Court programs. Now, some of my colleagues have said that they won't support the nomination because Justice Larsen was included on President Trump's short list for the Supreme Court. Is there anything wrong with the president suggesting who he's going to put on the support if he's elected president? If you look at her background, it should be no surprise that she was included on that list. She's an accomplished legal academic, a mainstream jurist, and well respected on a bipartisan basis throughout the legal community. Because my colleagues have been concerned about everyone on that list at her hearing, I asked Justice Larsen when she learned that her name was on that list. She replied, quote, "The date it was announced, it was a complete surprise to me," end of quote. I also asked her about judicial independence and whether she could rule against the president that nominated her. She replied, quote, "I would have no trouble ruling against the president who appointed me or any successor president as well. Judicial independence means one thing, one very simple thing. And at this point, I want to emphasize, those are my words, that is putting the law above everything else, the statutes passed by this body, and the Constitution of the United States. So I would have absolutely no trouble. Indeed, that would be my duty," end of quote. And here's the most outrageous reason I've heard for voting against Justice Larsen. This should surprise a lot of people. Some in the minority have suggested that she's somehow responsible for outside groups running ads supporting her nomination in Michigan. The claim that she is responsible for the action of an outside group is ridiculous. And the allegation that these ads are in some way a guarantee of how she will rule in the future is the most absurdly thing that I've heard based upon her answers to my questions. I find it interesting that my colleagues who are complaining about conservative groups don't seem to have the same concern for groups on the left that are spending money in opposition to these nominees. One such group, Alliance for Justice, routinely issues reports and press releases on judicial nominees. Oftentimes, these so-called reports put forward incendiary and false criticisms of these nominees. And my colleagues even make the same incendiary attacks against the nominee as these outside groups do. In other words, they use the same talking points. So I don't hear my colleagues on the other side up in arms about the other side spending millions of dollars to oppose nominees. And of course, some of you may remember last year, groups on the left coordinated attacks on this senator. I was followed all over Iowa by these groups and their members. They ran ads against me and put up billboards opposing my election. And that had something to do with the Supreme Court, as you might recall. I don't remember hearing any of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle complain about all the money that these groups are spending at that time. As I've said before, I expect outside groups on the left and on the right want to have their voices heard in the nomination process. Isn't that something to do with what we call democracy, representative government, freedom of speech, freedom of association? So, simply, there's nothing wrong with that, whether it's done by the right or the left. But I take issue with complaints from the other side that don't acknowledge that all sides have interest groups that are spending and engaging in the judicial nomination process. It was completely appropriate for Justice Larsen not to wade into the political debate regarding those political ads. Her answers to those questions were exactly what I'd expect an independent nominee to say, particularly if they want to stick by that they're going to be independent of any president that appoints them when they become on the bench. Justice Larsen's nomination is supported by a broad and diverse coalition of lawyers, judges, and academic colleagues. It's easy to see why, because she's an accomplished and well-respected academic. She is a brilliant and independent jurist. Her careful and well-reasoned legal analysis put her squarely within the mainstream of legal thought. So, I urge my colleagues in a few minutes to vote for her nomination.